she got to the end of Remembrance of the Daleks, and her judgment was too many guns. Absolutely, too many guns. And I'm thinking, hang on. You were in Resurrection of the Daleks, which has probably got the highest body count of any Doctor Who story ever. It's got guns from the very word go, where these two policemen pull out machine guns and gun down a whole alleyway full of people.
There was so many deaths in that one.
So many deaths.
Her character left the program.
And by the way, when she came back, it was in The Power of the Doctor, which also has got Tegan whipping a gun out from a floor panel, and it's got a lot of guns in it. So...
This is The Great and Secret Knowledge. My name is Jeff. With me tonight, James Lark. James, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Sorry, that was meant to be a lovely to see you, but I had half a mouthful of tea, and it's very early where I am. So my mouth hasn't quite started working properly yet. So apologies if I stumble any other over. This is going well, isn't it? We just had a very articulate conversation, and now we've started the show proper. My brain and my mouth have both stopped collaborating with each other.
That was pretty damn funny. I might clip it out, but it was funny. Oh God, what were you about to say? Lovely. Oh, you had a lovely. Yeah.
Just
lovely morning.
A gesture of happiness to be up early and talking to you.
Oh God, this is great. Yeah, because you're in England and it's super later there than it is here. So you're in the morning and I'm at night.
Or indeed earlier. I think we've gone past late and we're back into early.
Man, it's so cool being on a sphere with a distant star to give our lives, different. It's not like a disc world, with just one big thing overhead. Fascinating observation, Jeff.
Controversial as well. I wonder how many of your listeners don't hold that view, because I understand that we're allowed to hold different views about even, basic facts these days.
I feel like I should be funnier about it. Oh man. It feels kind of like we escaped, like we're a gazelle and we escaped the lions, and then our herd wandered off and we're just alone in this field, and we know the lions are coming. They're about 2 weeks away.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta put it out of my mind.
But also some of the gazelles were like, those lions. That was really fun, wasn't it? Being chased by the lions. Should we give the lions another go?
Oh my God. Oh, those lions weren't half bad. They only ate 10% of us.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm kidding. Donald Trump didn't eat 10% of us. It wasn't that bad. Oh, by the way, speaking of guns, we shot a CEO and everyone was happy. When I say we, I mean a disturbed individual among us who was Anyway, go on.
But yes, yeah, we're in an odd.
Not dead space. Oh God. Okay, let's reset. See, I'm in a nighttime mode and you're in a daytime mode.
Yeah.
We gotta link our modes. Okay. Amulet of Samarkand, chapters
Yes.
11 to 14. 11 to 14. So those are the numbers, if we didn't say last time. I feel like sometimes I'm like, yeah, 11 to 16. And then I get off the call and I'm like, that's too many chapters. So if you read too far, pat yourself on the back. You're a good reader.
It's quite dense writing, isn't it? I mean, I find it so easy to slip into.
Yes.
I haven't actually read on any further this time because I keep getting other books to read from Joe Ford, who's keen to do his podcast with me. But it's so good. I've been enjoying this so much.
Yeah, chapter 11 is Bartimaeus. So in response to what the boy said at the end of the last chapter, that this unfortunate magician is downstairs, Bartimaeus, downstairs? Well, that was surprising. So he's impressed that Nathaniel is trying to frame his master, and Nathaniel denies it. Bartimaeus doesn't listen, explains how unusual it is to target your own master, especially so early in your education. Do you want to read this one, James?
Yeah.
All right. This is a footnote.
Magicians are the most conniving, jealous, duplicitous group of people on earth, even including lawyers and academics. They worship power and the wielding thereof, and seek every chance they can to undercut their rivals. At a rough guess, about 80% of all summonses have to do with carrying out some skullduggery against a fellow magician, or with defence against the same. By contrast, most confrontations between spirits aren't personal at all, simply because they do not occur of our own free will. At that moment, for instance, I did not dislike Farquhar particularly. Well, actually, that's a lie. I loathed him, but no more than I had before. Anyway, our mutual hatred had taken many centuries, indeed millennia, to build up. Magicians squabble for fun. We'd really had to work at it.
Hell yeah. Oh, man. It's so odd to, like, imagine what their lives are like, where they're just in the soup of the fluidic space or whatever their genie world is, and then every so often they have to see people that they've occasionally worked with and, like, pretend to fight them, you know.
I like how vague it is kept as well, what that actually is like being not on the earthly realm, but on a different plane, one of the other 7 planes of existence that he mentions, maybe.
Yeah.
Or somewhere else entirely. It's not specified, is it?
Mm-mm. Yeah. So Bartimaeus explains how apprenticeship is meant to work. Since the days of the Median Magi, students have always lived alone in their mentor's house, one master to one pupil, conducting their lessons with secrecy and stealth. From ziggurat to pyramid, from sacred oak to skyscraper, thousands of years pass and things don't change. Wow. I can imagine getting sick of humans after knowing them for 5,000 years.
I'm not sure it takes 5,000 years, you know. There are days.
Indeed. Oh, I'll try not to fall apart like I did earlier in the call. If people hear that at all. Jeez. So Bartimaeus likes that the kid is so ambitious and willing to get his master killed. He hadn't ever heard of Underwood, so he figured he was a low-level nobody. And I thought this suggested that Bartimaeus has been summoned in the past few decades for him to assume that.
Yeah.
Unless they have really long lifespans, magicians.
No, he talks as if he's familiar with this world, but does he have to have been summoned to be aware of it?
Okay, this is an important question I had. I don't know if I wrote it down, but yes, that's a great question. Is exactly what is he doing? Like, how does he get his information? For example, in the Dresden Files, some supernatural beings have what's called it's a Latin word. Ah, shit. Anyway, there's like some Latin word for if they want to know something, they just kind of check the ether and they find it out. Unless it's like hidden or protected in some way. Or is he like over in the other realm watching RTV, while he's doing other demon stuff? Or does he get a fresh download when he pops in, 6 months, 5, 10 years later? Like, how do they stay current?
I don't know. And I don't know that it matters, except that there are so many magicians and they're all summoning demons all the time. And it's implied, isn't it, that Nathaniel researches quite carefully which demon to summon. So maybe Bartimaeus is one that's called on quite often.
How does Nathaniel know that somebody isn't going to summon Bartimaeus out from under him?
Oh, I don't know. And what happens if someone does that?
Is their call waiting? Like, maybe a messenger demon comes in. He's like, hey, sorry, Sal next door has got Bartimaeus for at least a week, so you're going to have to pick someone else.
Yeah, I don't know. It hadn't occurred to me whether the magic, the summons just doesn't work, perhaps. If
I feel like it should pump out a certain type of smoke or a funny sound, something, so you know that they're busy and not dead. Or
I mean, that must happen, right? With so many magicians, that there must be conflicts of interest and demons being summoned in different directions. And
yeah, I wonder if that'll come up in maybe book 3. We shall see.
We shall see.
All right. So he had all the time-honored attributes that other humans associate with great and powerful magic. A mane of unkempt hair the color of tobacco ash, a long whitish beard that jutted outward like the prow of a ship, and a pair of particularly bristly eyebrows. And then he's got a footnote. Do you want to read the footnote? Minor magicians.
Minor magicians take pains to fit this traditional wizardly bill. By contrast, the real powerful magicians take pleasure in looking like accountants.
Yeah, I imagine only lesser people in society get to dress however they want.
Yeah.
Like college professors can put a feather in their cap, but not a politician.
It's such a lovely idea, though, isn't it? That the really powerful magicians are basically like civil servants. That, I mean, well, it's obviously the whole setup is that they are the politicians, but that they dress in boring suits and they are as bland looking as a business person would be in our world, whereas minor magicians are so desperate to look like magicians that they cultivate the beards and
Indeed. So what did I mean by here? Martha is fully dressed and Bartimaeus is relieved. Oh, so when he's summoned, Martha is in the room and he's like, oh, thank goodness she's fully dressed. And I'm like, does he not like female nudity? Or does he judge her appearance unfavorably because she's an older lady?
I think he judges her appearance unfavorably.
I mean, I guess it could just be an aesthetic thing. But if you're not into human ladies, like, what does it matter?
Well, he's not. He's quite rude about all the humans he comes
That's a good point. It's this thing with the Egyptian boy that's got me confused, because he said he loved him.
Oh, yeah. Well, I like that we don't know anything about it, but we know that he has cultivated an actual friendship, it would appear, with a human boy. So, although he's very antagonistic with Nathaniel and compares him unfavorably to the boy, and we get this striking image of Bartimaeus taking the shape of a boy to converse with Nathaniel. So the visual there is two boys having an argument. There's still, we know that Bartimaeus is perhaps not quite so anti-human as he makes out, and he's beginning to develop a kind of admiration for Nathaniel. So is there potential there for a similar kind of relationship to build up between the two of them?
Let's see. I guess you could start by admiring your enemy, and then maybe you learn more about them, learn to empathize or respect. But at a certain point, they need to stop being your enemy, right?
Yeah.
Or else you'll still want them dead or whatever. From enemy to tolerated acquaintance.
Though how many, it's how many romance novels are based on the idea of two people hating each other and gradually developing mutual respect and then realizing that they really love each other. And
yes. Sorry, I'm just thinking about it. I guess there's Rey and what's his name from the Star Wars sequels? Kylo Ren. But I don't read romance novels really. So
no, I don't
know
read romance novels, but I am familiar with the trope. I say I don't read romance novels. Many years ago, I was involved in a piece of theatre based on Mills and Boon books. Do you have Mills and Boon over there?
It doesn't ring a bell.
So they write the most formulaic, trashy romance novels, and they're always on the top shelf of bookshops at train stations and airports for a particular demographic that just wants to read this sort of fantasy fulfillment novel. But they're so formulaic that we were able to base an improv show around them, and the formula was very often girl hates boy, boy does something heroic, girl realizes that maybe girl doesn't hate boy, but boy is somehow unattainable, something happened. We worked it all out. There's a chapter by chapter formula, whereas by about halfway through the book, the girl will desperately want the boy, but there'll be some sort of obstacle. It's delayed until the final chapter, of course, and then they live happily ever after. It's Pride and Prejudice, it's exactly the same story, although Pride and Prejudice is better written.
Yeah, I was thinking Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, so it's very much same, yeah. Yeah, Beatrice and Benedict.
A Marriage of True Minds. Let's see. Bartimaeus is still a spider. Underwood complains about the spider to Martha. Bartimaeus goes to the study and sees a pentacle on the door. He puts on a shield. There's a fire trap, and the amulet sucks up all the magical energy, so it doesn't hurt him.
It's the moment we realize how powerful this amulet might be.
Yeah, just yoinks all that energy. So he slips under the door, he looks around the study, and he remarks that the security is pretty weak. He goes into the cabinet with the fanciest items, and he's underwhelmed by the objects inside. He slides the amulet behind a bird token and then leaves. He goes up the stairs, but he stops when he sees Mrs. Underwood leading Nathaniel downstairs. And Nathaniel now knows he's screwed because Bartimaeus is supposed to quietly stick near to him until summoned. And though Bartimaeus doesn't know, Nathaniel knows that Mrs. Underwood is always calling him Nathaniel.
Yeah.
Let's see. You want to take this quote? The door shut so fast.
The door shut so fast that I had to do a couple of quick-fire shots of web to trapeze myself through the crack before it closed. It was a great stunt. I wish someone had seen it. But no, silent and unseen, that's me.
Yeah, I relate to this so hard. Like when you do something really nice and you have no one to brag about it with. Like some folks are lucky. I think you have a partner. I had one once upon a time. It's just nice to be able to tell somebody, hey, I did this great thing. Check me out. But Bartimaeus, again, we don't know if he has like friends or lovers over in fluidic space or whatever it's called.
Well, except that it's implied that they don't.
Oh, they don't even have individual.
They don't really have friendships because you never know when you're going to be summoned to do something that's at odds with with another demon.
Shit.
The way it's described is a fairly kind of individual existence, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe the way he keeps himself positive is to sort of pretend like everything's fine. Because he doesn't seem as like depressed as I would be if I was in his position.
Yeah.
So Underwood is really rude to Nathaniel and his wife. He's like whacking his newspaper and shit. And then Bartimaeus hears Nathaniel's name.
And it's the moment we've been dreading, isn't it?
Hell yeah. Bartimaeus takes a look around and I don't know, he must be exulting in this victory. But he notices dead flowers for the husband, fresh ones for the apprentice. That was intriguing. So he's trying to figure out this kid's whole deal. He studies the boy's appearance and manner. Do you have to a casual observer?
To a casual observer, he was an unremarkable boy. But to my wiser and more jaundiced gaze, there were other things to note. Shrewd and calculating eyes. Fingers that tapped impatiently on the papers he held. Most of all, a very careful face that by subtle shifts took on whatever expression was expected of it. For the moment he had adopted a submissive but attentive look that would flatter an old man's vanity. Yet continually he cast his eye around the room, searching for me.
Oh, man. It's so much work to make your face do things rather than just be yourself. I feel like I had a lot of training in this area. But it's a short step from wearing masks like that to being an empty vessel and just doing whatever the hell you want because you're not real. Like, I worry about Nathaniel that he'll become like an American Psycho type.
Well, there is. I mean, we still don't know that much about what's going on, but there's an aspect, isn't there?
Yeah.
He's clearly meddling with something that's way out of his comfort zone.
But I identify with his desire for revenge.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Oh, absolutely that. But, yeah, it's very interesting. And if I mean, I work with kids. If a child is really bright and a bit subversive, then you see all of these things, the careful observation, the switching of character depending on who they're talking to, the ability to pretend. It's not necessarily something sinister, but it is kind of the start of a pathway towards kind of a psychopathic behavior, isn't it? Because it's always manipulating the people that you're in any kind of exchange with.
Yeah, and normal just walking around life shouldn't be like going
It
behind
shouldn't be
enemy
that kind
lines.
of effort. Exactly, yeah.
For an autistic person like myself, some of that just masking and trying to fit in, but it's not quite the same as bide my time until I can slit that guy's throat. You know?
Yes.
So Bartimaeus is capering on the ceiling to attract Nathaniel's attention. Underwood complains about the prime minister hanging out with this guy called Makepeace, who writes plays and he like puts misinformation into them that Underwood thinks is dangerous. And he thinks the prime minister should help the Interior Department do their search instead of socializing. Underwood says Nathaniel has done well enough to perform his first summoning. And Nathaniel has this look on his face, right? Because he knows he's screwed. And Underwood thinks he's just scared of summoning demons, but it's actually because Nathaniel is tripping. Let's see. This is Underwood. "Listen to me, boy," he said. "If you fret at the very prospect of a summons, you will never make a magician, even now. A well-prepared magician fears nothing. Do you understand?" By nothing, I guess Underwood doesn't include like a guy with money and power humiliating his student.
Yeah.
That's different. Shut up. Don't pay attention to that. So the plan is to summon something called the Natterjack Impling.
It's so funny, isn't it? I mean, we know Nathaniel has summoned Bartimaeus, and
Yes.
so we're in on it. We're in on the subterfuge.
Heck yeah, this is fun. So Bartimaeus is unimpressed. Nathaniel's contact lenses have arrived, and so that explains how he was able to summon Bartimaeus, right? Because he's
yes, yeah. So
he
he's
just got them.
That must be the thing that he's been waiting for.
So he hears a noise at the door. Underwood disregards it. He wants Nathaniel to bring a book of names.
Lowe's Nominative Almanac.
Yes. What's that called again?
Lowe's Nominative Almanac.
Yeah. Nathaniel can clearly tell Bartimaeus got his name. This quote starts, "I had a chance at him now."
I had a chance at him now. Things were a bit more even. He knew my name. I knew his. He had 6 years' experience. I had 5,010. That was the kind of odds you could do something with.
Hell yeah. Oh, man. He's hyping himself up, getting ready to wage war. He makes a little joke. The boots were on the other 8 feet now. Because he's a spider. All right, moving on. Chapter 12. One summer's day, when Nathaniel was 10 years old, he sat with his tutor on the stone seat in the garden, sketching the horse chestnut tree beyond the wall. The sun beat upon the red bricks. A gray and white cat lolled on the top of the wall, idly swishing its tail from side to side. A gentle breeze shifted the leaves of the tree and carried a faint scent across from the rhododendron bushes. The moss on the statue of the man with the lightning fork gleamed richly in the yellow sunlight. Insects hummed. It was the day that everything changed. It's a good setup. Getting y'all bucolic and happy, and then, oh no, something's coming. Let's see. He complains about Underwood not teaching him enough. He talks about how he's read all these books. No, can you read this Bartimaeus quote? "I don't know which is less attractive."
I don't know which is less attractive, Nathaniel, your boasting or your petulance. You should stop worrying about what you don't yet have and enjoy what you have now. This garden, for instance. I'm very pleased you thought of having our lesson out here today.
Oh, is that Mrs. Lutchins?
That's Mrs. Lutchins.
Ah, okay.
So
Got it.
The art teacher.
Yeah, Nathaniel says it's peaceful and he likes the statue. He asks, who is it? And she tells him it's Gladstone. He was a powerful prime minister. He fought a duel with a guy named Disraeli over a woman. And I don't know who he is, but Benjamin Disraeli was a famous person, right?
They were both prime ministers. So this is really interesting because he's taken something that's basically a real world truth. He's just added this magical element to it. And in Bartimaeus, Gladstone actually had defeated Disraeli with magic, didn't he? So Disraeli was a Conservative prime minister, very well respected, and symbolises one nation conservatism as it is now known. He was prime minister twice. He did 2, I think, 6-year stints as prime minister, and was indeed defeated by Gladstone politically, Gladstone being the Liberal Democrat leader of the time, who did 12 years as prime minister himself. So they were both real people. Gladstone outlived Disraeli, having defeated him politically and become prime minister in his place. Their rivalry was very well known. When Disraeli died, Gladstone snubbed the funeral. I think he made an excuse and didn't turn up, and was very widely criticised for that, and ended up doing a kind of some sort of speech to try and smooth over what had been perceived as just being very ungenerous towards his former rival.
Wow, that's so petty. I love it.
But I love the idea that they were politically at loggerheads and stood for polar opposite sides of the political spectrum. Gladstone didn't like Disraeli and defeated him in an election. I love that in this world that's been turned into some sort of magical duel.
Yeah, it's the death, I think.
Yeah.
Jesus. So the way she described it, Nathaniel's getting his back up. Nathaniel looked at her. What do you mean for better or for worse? What's worse about it? Ms. Lutchins pursed her lips. The current system is very beneficial for magicians and for a few lucky others who cluster all about them. Less so for everyone else. Now, let me see how your sketch is going. So he gets pretty shirty about all this. It starts ranting about how good the government is. And she explains that some countries don't need magicians. He says she doesn't know anything because she's a commoner. And she says commoners can be smart. He asks if she wanted to be a magician, and she says no, she's happy to be an art teacher. Nathaniel is surprised that she has other pupils, and it makes him feel queasy.
I wondered if there's a kind of nuclear weapons thing going on here with the discussion about other countries. Nathaniel has obviously been brought up to believe that magic is the way of wielding power, and that countries who don't have magicians are weak and vulnerable. And Miss Lutchins implies that actually that's not necessarily the case, and there are countries who don't have magicians and they're perfectly all right. And it just reminded me of the way that the discussion around nuclear weapons and the justification that's always given for them is that it's on this weaponry rests our security. But there are very big countries, the Netherlands.
Nobody's invaded them yet.
No one seems to be threatening to invade them either. So it just seemed to me like whether it's deliberate or not, that seemed to be the corollary.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like Game of Thrones with dragons, here it's wizards that can do all sorts of terrible stuff. Mrs. Underwood blows in frantically. Apparently, Underwood wants him to meet some guests. Miss Lutchins thinks this is good news. But Nathaniel's daunted by the thought of meeting all these magicians. And he thinks weirdly they don't look like magicians. Do you have this one? There wasn't a cape to be seen.
There wasn't a cape to be seen. There were precious few beards on display, and none half as impressive as that of his own master. Most of the men wore drab suits with drabber ties. Only a few sported daring additions, such as a grey waistcoat or a visible breast-pocket handkerchief. All wore shiny black shoes. It felt to Nathaniel as if he had strayed upon an undertaker's office party.
Oh man, that's so bad. Amazing. What a life to aspire to.
We're seeing Nathaniel at a obviously a pivotal moment. And on the one hand, he's very precocious. We get the sense that he's impatient, but also more brilliant than is necessarily being recognised. But he still, at this point, he still thinks his master is the real deal. He doesn't have the inside knowledge that we do, that the beard is actually a sign of a minor magician.
Yeah. Yeah, it turns out Bartimaeus wasn't just full of shit. Nathaniel is underwhelmed. Underwood is schmoozing around. When he sees Nathaniel, he waves him over. He meets 3 wizards, who I have named Old Tomato Face, Clammy Doughboy, and Slickback Big Teeth, a.k.a. Simon Lovelace. So Doughboy has a question. "Do you beat him?" the clammy man asked. "Rarely." "Unwise. It stimulates the memory." That can't be true. Surely. Surely.
What, that being beaten stimulates the... That's a Dickensian sentiment, surely.
So Big Teeth is super rude. Nathaniel contradicts one of them, so Underwood sends him away. Big Teeth observes that he's not afraid of his elders. "Perhaps you don't think we're your betters?" And Nathaniel doesn't answer this because he's totally confused. And I get this all the time, this like flooding of like, how am I supposed to react to this or respond to this? Like what do normal people say here? Like when people say intentionally confusing or contradictory shit, it's so frustrating.
Well, and there's this, it's the classic status tug of war between a boy who these magicians can tell is perhaps quite bright. But as we know, magicians are an insecure breed, and they want to assert their own superiority over a child because they're that petty and...
Yeah, super petty.
But they're always going to get the upper hand as well. They're more experienced, they're older. There's no way that Nathaniel's going to walk out of this situation on top.
I feel like because his master is low level, this was always going to happen, even if he was
I think so.
known as the best. Because they can't raid each other's apprentice, because then more than one person would know the kid's real name, right?
Yeah.
So I at first I was like, well, if they could raid each other's apprentices, maybe they wouldn't be so rude to them, but it would just have a whole host of other terrible problems. So let's see. He demands a quiz from Nathaniel. Underwood isn't protecting him at all, and Nathaniel answers all the questions right. Would you read "He had committed simple details"?
He had committed simple details such as these to memory long ago, and he was pleased to note that his unerringly correct answers were exasperating the young man. His success had also stopped the clammy man snickering, and the old magician, who was listening with his head cocked to one side, had even nodded grudgingly once or twice. He noticed his master smiling rather smugly. "Not that I owe any of this to you," Nathaniel thought witheringly. "I read all this. You taught me next to nothing."
Ugh, that would be so frustrating.
Yeah.
So Simon asks him about, I think we've learned by now, that's why I switched to Simon, asked him about 6 words of direction. Underwood objects because Nathaniel shouldn't know any of that yet. Nathaniel does it anyway. Do you think he knows that he should pretend not to know it, but he just has too much ego? Or does he not even know that he should?
Or has he started... I'm not sure Nathaniel has quite started pretending yet. Not in the way that we've seen him do in the present. And this is obviously...
Oh, this is the incident. This is the incident. Thing, yeah.
And he's been told to read... He's been pointed out the books. I don't know whether... Is it said that he's broken into the bookcase that he's not supposed to... Right, so okay,
the 6 words of direction are in a different book that he shouldn't have read already.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. I think he takes the bait, doesn't he? He
just can't help himself. The men are impressed.
It also shows up his master's stupidity, because any decent teacher would go, hang on. What?
Yeah, he would have stopped this little quiz in its tracks and been like, excuse me, gentlemen. Where the fuck did you learn that shit? Did you find yourself another master? So this next quote, Simon is getting real pissed. But his interrogator just shrugged dismissively, as if the incident were of no account. He looked so supercilious that Nathaniel felt his self-satisfaction turn into a fiery anger. Yes. That is how you feel when somebody pulls this rhetorical device. Do you know what this is called? Where you act like the thing you were just super serious about is just no big deal. I feel like there's a Latin word for it.
I don't know if it has a name, but or a German, a lengthy German word to describe.
Simon says some rude shit, and Nathaniel claps back, calls him a sore loser.
And this is what I mean. We know that he's not going to come out of this well. I mean, that's the point where it's like, no, Nathaniel.
Right. It's like he never learned that some people you just can't win against.
You just have to suck it up. You just have to let them think that they have won this particular argument.
But part of this is fucking his owner, but his magician's, his master, that's right, his master's choice to not socialize him with other children and other grown-ups.
That seems to be the way it works, though, doesn't it? It's
because they don't want you to know anyone else.
Yeah. And his master's uselessness in not overseeing this exchange.
Yeah, Simon sends these demons after the boy, and the boy doesn't know exactly because he doesn't have lenses yet, so he doesn't know what they are, but he knows that they're beating his ass, or they're holding him anyway. And the guy says, "You cocksure gutter snipe." You want to do that one?
"You cocksure gutter snipe," the young man said softly. "What will you do now? Can you get free? No. How surprising. You're helpless. You know a few words, but you're capable of nothing. Perhaps this will teach you the dangers of insolence when you're too weak to fight back. Now get out of my sight."
So, at a certain point in your development, you eventually learn that people like this, their words mean nothing at the end of the day. Like, they're just saying stuff. So you really don't have to take any of it on board. But even if you do find something worth learning from their rant, more likely what you'll learn is what they think about themselves or messages people have dumped on them. And if that's not the case, it's purely a ploy to break down your self-esteem because you're a threat to them in some way or another. Either way, you don't want to let it get to you because it'll drive you nuts. and you'll end up saying some shit, getting in fights.
Yeah. Yes.
So everyone's staring at Nathaniel, and he looks to Underwood, who is mad at him instead of Simon after this terrifying display. So Nathaniel leaves and goes upstairs. He runs into Mrs. Underwood, and he asks her who the big teeth guy is. She says it's Simon Lovelace. And here we get the device of a repetition of a thought that like won't leave your head. And it's like often it's in italics where like if it's in someone else's voice. So Simon is kind of haunting him.
You're capable of nothing.
Yeah, you're helpless.
You're helpless. You're too weak to fight back. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I wondered in your stories, have you ever used that technique, the repetition of phrases?
Yeah. I'm looking at it now, and it's very elegant, isn't it? It's a very neat way of communicating something that you could spend a whole paragraph doing. I can't think of an example when I've used that technique. I would say I have, but I'm looking at it now, going, I should use that more often.
Well, it's not the kind of thing that our brains do naturally. Like it's more like a distillation of what they're doing down into an easily written outable phrase or whatever. Like things people say get to us, but they don't necessarily just float there in one sentence. But it gets the point across. Rather than being like, oh, he pictured this and he pictured that and he pictured strangling Simon. You know, it's more like remember that moment and how messed up it made him.
A thing that you have to remember to do when you're writing is credit your readers with some intelligence, because, I mean, this is a fairly simple example, but he knows that the reader is going to remember Simon Lovelace saying these things a page ago and is going to put two and two together and work out what these italics mean. And sometimes I think the temptation is there to try and kind of spell everything out when you write, but you need to trust that your reader's going to be engaged in what you're writing enough to follow what's going on, so that you don't have to spell everything out. You can actually just drop things in and let the reader work out where they're coming from.
Yeah. Let's see. So he goes to the workroom. He grabs the box of mites and a hammer. He steps out. The party's breaking up. Magicians are clumped at the front door. And he's prepping himself to cast the spell. You had to say the name after the first three commands, but before the last. It was not too difficult, provided you didn't trip over the quicker syllables. He ran it through his head again. Yes, he had it down fine. So yeah, we just saw him all flustered and stuff, and now we see him in his element. Like, this is what he does.
Yeah, although it doesn't look good, does it? I mean...
it's his first time trying to kill people. It's
yeah, I know, but like they're described as mites, and you're like, oh, come on, this is not a good idea.
This was never going to go any other way. So he says the words, smashes the box with the hammer. The 6 mites go for the magicians. I keep almost saying musicians. Simon bats his away. Doughface falls down out the door and gets a couple, attacking his skin. The old man barely reacts, sending his into the carpet, where Simon smashes it with his foot. Underwood is shocked. He goes over to Doughface and deactivates the still active mites. Nathaniel rushes to the schoolroom, where he sees Mrs. Lutchins. She realizes he's upset and goes to comfort him. Do you have what's the matter?
Yeah, what's the matter? You look ill. You're shaking. She put her arm around him and let his head rest gently against her side. He closed his eyes. His face was on fire. He felt cold and hot all at the same time. She was still talking to him, but he could not answer her. At that moment, the schoolroom door blew open.
Oh, man. This is a fraught situation. It's like
Yeah,
we all know
he's done it now.
We all know where this is going, but they're going to force us to sit through it. Simon uses magic to lift Nathaniel up into the air, butt first, and spanks him repeatedly with a stick or a hand or something invisible until he loses all sense. Fervently, he wished he were dead. And when at last a darkness welled up and began to carry him away, he welcomed it with all his heart. The hands released him, but he was already unconscious before he hit the floor. Ugh. Being publicly spanked is the worst.
It's pretty awful, isn't it? And again, it's Dickensian. It goes way back. It's very Nicholas Nickleby, all of this. By the way, I love that the clammy magician turns out not to be very good. That the old one and Lovelace just kind of deal with these mites, but he's stuck in a flower bed, isn't he?
Yep. Clammy doughboy. So Nathaniel's stuck in his room for a month, being punished severely. He gets no lessons, so he can only sit in his room and look out the window. He finds a pen and starts sketching the outside. Then he begins to intricately plot his revenge. Did you ever plot anything at age 10 there, James?
Oh, revenges, yeah, but never followed through. I think most children plot the revenge. I mean, the thing that it was a bit of a... I think it came up on children's television a lot. There were always stories about runaways. And, of course, on TV, there were always children from either it would be a evil stepmother, stepfather type fairy tale, or it would be a gritty urban drama with some actual kind of abusive family situation. Whereas my parents were just kind of doing the usual parent things of disciplining me and telling me off when I was naughty, and I'd be like, right, well, I'm packing a bag and I'm running away. That's because that's what kids do. And
that's right. Well, if they had showed us what orphanages were really like, or foster homes, like, it's tricky because you don't want people to not support the foster system, but at the same time, it can be pretty dark at times. But yeah, sometimes kids just like want to get the hell out. There should be like an intermediate sort of like halfway runaway place. A
safe house the kids can
yeah.
The kids can get to. The parents know where it is.
It's run by Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. You ever hear of that series?
Who is Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle?
Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle is this friendly old lady that lives at the end of the lane, and like all the neighborhood kids like come by, and she gives them like weird little projects. And I don't think Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle would be allowed to run this operation nowadays, but
I think in this age of rigorous safeguarding, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle is going to have a lot of forms to fill in. Certainly,
she was almost like a hedge witch. Like people would come with her with their problems, and she'd make them a potion or tell them to put their hand on their nose.
Okay, well, that is definitely what we would consider a low-level safeguarding concern.
Okay, so he finds a pen. He's intricately plotting his revenge. Mrs. Underwood has been forbidden from talking to him. And when school starts again, he learns that Ms. Lutchins has been fired.
That rings true as well. There's always a scapegoat. When something goes wrong, if you're as petty and unremarkable as Nathaniel's master now turns out to be, it's never going to be your fault. So who can you get rid of? Who can take the blame for this? It must be the art teacher. Of course it's the art teacher. Where does he get these ideas from? It's the teacher who had him outdoors with her talking to him about her common ways.
Yeah, bad people always need someone to blame it on, or they can't continue the grift. I know this well. That there's some, like, if you can't apologize, you can't sustain relationships. So like the narcissist in my life, people would just come and go, and like no wonder Underwood doesn't have any friends. No wonder everybody looks down on him because he's a complete dickhead.
Yeah.
But like things like this, even if his student had been arrogant and like made him look bad, that's still a teaching opportunity to go, look, you humiliated me and put us all at risk. You're going to be punished, but you're also going to learn from this experience. But instead, he just blames it on somebody else, fucking punishes him, won't let him talk to his his mom.
Won't communicate with him for a lengthy period of time.
Yeah. And that's another thing these people do is withdraw their attention.
Yep.
Like, it's so easy for them just to refuse to even look at you.
And yet, ironically, Nathaniel does learn from this experience, so it's maybe not the lesson that Underwood would have wanted him to learn, but
you're absolutely right. It doesn't really bring them closer together.
No, it certainly doesn't.
Chapter 13. He spends a lot of time out in the garden, plotting revenge or reading books. He made swift progress with his studies, for his mind was fired with hate. All the rites of summoning, all the incantations that a magician could bind around himself to prevent attack, all the words of power that smote the disobedient demon or dismissed it in a trice, Nathaniel read and committed these to memory. He looks to the statue of Gladstone for inspiration to keep his determination up. He plans to emulate Gladstone by punishing his enemies.
If he had learned one painful lesson, it was not to act until he was truly ready, and through many long solitary months he worked tirelessly towards his first aim, the humiliation of Simon Lovelace.
Oh my God. So, the source of the hubris has been discovered. There's humiliation, and then there's starting a war. Like, he had to pick the thing that, like, this guy's whole operation depends on, apparently. Nathaniel decides to come at him with sneakiness and trickery, not head on. He pretends to be reformed, wearing a meek and pliant mask. He controls his face just like a master liar / sociopath.
Yes.
And he doesn't see Underwood as his master anymore. His masters were the magicians of old, who spoke to him through their books, allowing him to learn at his own pace and offering ever-multiplying marvels for his mind. They did not patronize or betray hm.
So there you go. That's the lesson he's learned, is that he's not going to get anything more from Underwood. And that revenge is a dish best served cold. And he learns the lesson of, as you say, being a sociopath and
at the very least,
his
keeping your truth all to yourself.
Yeah.
It's toxic. But it's a way to defend yourself if you're stuck living with someone that's complete trash.
At this point, he's got two options. He either meekly decides that he's been bettered by someone he shouldn't have challenged, or he takes him on.
Yeah. So Underwood not defending him made him lose all respect for him. A master should treat an apprentice like their child. Why didn't Underwood protect him? Nathaniel figures it's because he's a coward, afraid of Lovelace's power. Apologies if this is too personal, but did you ever have a situation like this? Somebody didn't protect you and should have?
That's a really interesting question. I certainly think that when I was at school, I wasn't liked by all of my teachers. I think I had a vein of creativity that emerged in often quite unconventional ways and was interpreted as disobedience. It may well have been disobedience as well, but I do think that quite often the side of others was taken, and in situations where now, as with my teacher's hat on, I'd look at them and go, the correct response to this would have been to take a wider perspective and to try and see all sides of the argument and have a discussion about it. Quite often I was treated as the party to be punished in exchanges with other pupils that were not necessarily so clear cut, I would say. Not generally. I didn't have an unhappy childhood, but I think that I had some quite fractious relationships when I was at primary school.
Yeah, I really owe a lot to those teachers that forbade bullying and like made a point of like punishing it, because at least I knew like, well, this isn't supposed to be happening. So that's nice. even if it doesn't stop it completely. So sacking Miss Lutchins was among Underwood's worst crimes. From brief conversations with Mrs. Underwood, Nathaniel learned that while he had been suspended upside down, being beaten by Lovelace's imp, Miss Lutchins had done her best to help him. Officially, she had been fired for insolence and impertinence, but it was hinted that she had actually tried to hit Mr. Lovelace and had only been restrained from doing so by his companions. When he thought about this, Nathaniel's blood boiled even more forcefully than when he considered his own humiliation.
So there you go. Miss Lutchins has actually been doing the correct job of a teacher.
Yes.
And trying to...
like, this is wrong. What the hell are you doing? Oh, my God.
That's very Nicholas Nickleby as well. If you think about the section in the Do the Boys Hall, Nickleby is eventually dismissed because he intervenes in the beating of Smike and ends up taking control and beating Squeers himself. So again, I think it's a coincidence rather than any kind of deliberate reference, but this thread of slightly Dickensian treatment of children is it's very kind of rooted in existing literature.
Yeah. So Nathaniel can't forgive Underwood for this. Mrs. Underwood was his only light, but now he can't be totally honest with her. He doesn't have his own lenses yet, so he uses the master's to summon an imp. He makes a polished bronze disc. He waits until the Underwoods leave for a trip so he can get the lenses. He makes a circle and uses a bowl of rowan wood and hazel. He steps into his circle and begins. He starts his incantation. He wishes he had some water, because once you start a summoning, you can't safely stop to go get water.
And yeah, and if you make a single mistake in your summonsing, it can compromise it and give power to the demon you're summoning. So he wants the water in case he's because his throat is dry and he doesn't want the words to come out wrong. You suddenly realize just how high stakes this whole operation is.
Scary stuff. I got to get some water too. I'll be right back. I got to read this Nicholas Nickleby. It sounds good. Is that also Dickens?
That's Dickens, yeah. It's one of his earlier ones. It's very... it's populated with very colourful characters. It's kind of overwritten in the way that his early stuff is, but very entertainingly. But there's a lot of it. It's a sprawling epic of a novel. And it's based on Dickens, as a journalist, had visited boarding schools in the north of England. And he based the boarding school section of this book on what he had seen and the abuse he had seen in those establishments, and actually got things changed it made people aware of what was going on. So quite a significant book as a piece of social commentary.
That's really cool. Over here we have Upton Sinclair for that, for The Jungle. Are you familiar with The Jungle?
I'm not, no.
So it was a big book because it highlighted the crushing poverty and like danger of working in the meatpacking industry in Chicago. Mostly immigrants, and just the horrors that they experience. And also just because of the low standards, how much other weird shit was getting in the meat, like rats and poop and everything else. So now we have very specific standards for how much
rats you're allowed in your meat.
Yeah, exactly. Rat fecal particles or whatever. Hey, let's see here. Welcome back, folks. Rat feces. So the imp appears as a naked baby with yellow eyes and red lips. It appears Nathaniel easily confines it into this disc. Nathaniel uttered several charms to secure the disc and check for snares, but all was well. With shaking legs, he stepped from his circle. His first summons had been successful. So Nathaniel can now spy all over the place. He keeps the disc hidden under the roof tiles. First, he spies on his master's office, but gives up after seeing how boring it is. Then he spies on Miss Lutchins and her pupil. Do you want to take this, Nathaniel's eyes?
Nathaniel's eyes burned hot with jealousy and grief. In a choked voice, he ordered the image to vanish, grinding his teeth at the laughter that bubbled up from the delighted imp.
I remember feeling this way when I saw someone else starting their piano lesson, or maybe they were ending. But anyway, there were someone else with Mrs. Jones, and they were better than me. And it was like, I was like, oh, she's going to think less of me because I didn't practice. Plus, it feels kind of like he's in love with Ms. Lutchins in a way, or something similar anyway.
Well, yeah.
Hero worship.
Hero worship, and she's someone who has understood him. And weirdly, with the conversation about magic, sort of has shown herself to be superior to him in a way that he hasn't felt that from the magicians. But with her giving a different perspective, he's actually been shown up by her and shown that he still has some things to learn.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the rest of the series, but I do think that all of us can point to a person or a moment that probably had a outsized impact on our moral development. You know, there are certain people that prove to us that human beings are capable of being good and like doing the right thing, having integrity. And even if we've gone down a bunch of bad roads, we can still look to those examples and embody their example. I don't know. There's probably another word for that. It's like they're mentoring you even though they're not around anymore because they're haunting you in a different way. Nathaniel orders Imp to spy on Lovelace. It balks at this, given how powerful Simon is. The job is not impossible, just difficult. So he sends him on his way. The Imp sees Simon Lovelace typing on a computer. The Imp is getting bored. Nathaniel orders him to stay, and he says a word that causes the Imp pain. The Imp can't get too near in case Lovelace's defenses twig to his presence. So he's kind of waiting longer than the Imp wants to. And this brings us to the introduction of a scary, huge beardo. James, why don't you take this one?
Nathaniel jumped. Someone else was in Simon Lovelace's room, standing in the shadows by the curtains. Nathaniel had not seen him enter, and nor, for that matter, had the magician, who was still typing away with his back to the intruder. The figure was a tall, massively built man, swathed in a long leather travelling cape that extended almost to the bottom of his boots. Both cape and boots were heavily stained with mud and wear. A thick, black beard covered most of the man's face. Above it, his eyes glinted in the darkness. Something about the look of them made Nathaniel's skin cruel.
That's how you introduce a murderer.
Oh, yes.
You ever meet anybody in person that you're like, I'm pretty sure that guy's a murderer?
No, I'm not.
I was on a bus once, and this guy said some shit and just had the presence and the vibe, and I was like, oh, that guy probably has killed someone. Ugh. Scary stuff. Let's see. Who is L? Oh, I must have meant Lovelace. Simon Lovelace is startled by the man's appearance, suggesting that he bypassed all his security. How does he do that? That's my question. How does he do that?
Well, magic, I imagine.
You think Big Beardo has magic?
Oh, I think so.
Lovelace whips out a bunch of cash, hands it to the guy, and the imp warns Nathaniel that a watcher is on its way. I presume this is similar type of watcher that Bartimaeus runs into.
Yeah, so we know about the security in Lovelace's house already, don't we? Because Bartimaeus has given us a fairly detailed description of what he's had to get past.
Yeah, the yellow legs with stools or whatever.
The demons disguised as smoke alarms.
Yeah. Nathaniel tells him to stay until the last second. Lovelace reaches out for his prize. Big Beardo gives him a small parcel, which he frantically unwraps. And the imp dips out, but before he does, Nathaniel sees the amulet. The imp is being annoying, but Nathaniel demands to know what he saw and heard. Just tell me. Big fellow didn't say much. Did you see those red stains on his cape, incidentally? Very suspicious. Not ketchup, let's put it that way. Fresh, too, I could smell it. What did he say now? I have it. That was one thing. And I want my payment first. Man, a few words, I'd call him. Was he a demon? By that crude remark, I assume you mean a noble entity from the other place. Nope. Man. A noble entity from the other place. Love it.
So, if you meet someone who looks like a murderer and they've got blood stains on their cape, that's...
I feel like nobody else takes this guy that seriously. Like Bartimaeus isn't like, you should stay as far away from that guy as possible. He's just like, another murderer. Who cares? They're a dime a dozen. So Lovelace is super ego, and the Beardo says, the Amulet of Samarkand is yours, Lovelace. 6 months pass while Nathaniel prepares his plan. The imp can't get that close again. Underwood is still slow-rolling him, thinking he's too dull to teach new things. And that brings us to chapter 14.
Oh, do you want this final quote, though? This is a good one. All that remained was to find himself a servant who could do what he required, something powerful and resourceful enough to carry out his plan, but not so potent that it would threaten Nathaniel himself. The time for mastering the great entities was not yet here. He read through his master's works of demonology. He studied track records through the ages. He read about the lesser servants of Solomon and Ptolemy. Finally, he chose Bartimaeus. It's a great chapter ending. And also it refers to Solomon and Ptolemy. Refers to Ptolemy.
That is nice. Yeah, sometimes when a book bounces back and forth between time, it can get a little confusing or just sort of random. But this one is very surgical with the way it ties past to present and future.
It's very carefully paced, isn't it? The way things are revealed in both of those time frames, and the knowledge complements each one.
And funny, too, I almost think thematically it's interesting that Bartimaeus is kind of telling us what's happening now, and Nathaniel's remembering what happened then.
What happened then to bring him to this point, yeah.
Yeah. So Bartimaeus decides to manifest as a human next time he's summoned. It's odd, but being insulted by a flickering specter, or being called names by a fiery winged serpent, isn't half as annoying for a hardened magician as hearing it from the mouth of something that seems to be human. Don't ask me why. It's just something to do with the way people's minds work. So he forgets about being a hot naked lady and instead decides to look like Ptolemy, a 14-year-old Egyptian boy. He thought it would inspire the boy's jealousy and rivalry.
And like I say, that's a brilliant visual because you can picture two kids. You could film this scene so easily.
Yeah.
And it'd be two kids, facing off. But one of them is actually
one of them is older
demon.
And cooler. He's got better clothes, probably, because he can just imagine them. Bartimaeus is stoked because he has a handle on the kid now, meaning his name. Do you want to read this footnote?
Yeah. Armed with this, I would be able to combat the whippersnapper's most vicious attacks. Knowledge of the name redresses the power balance a little, you see, acting as a kind of defensive shield for Jinn inside the circle. It's a simple and very ancient kind of talisman, and, well, what are you hanging around reading this for? Read on quickly and see for yourself.
Hell yes. It's funny, Doctor Who fans have been treated to some of this of late, this fourth wall breaking. It can be pretty entertaining.
Oh, it goes way back to 1964.
At the Feast of Stephen?
Yes.
Let's see, Nathaniel goes to his circle. Bartimaeus appears in his London gear. Nathaniel tries to order Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus is like, "Give over, kid." Nathaniel is losing his cool. Old or young, small or fat, the besetting weakness of all magicians is their pride. They can't bear to be laughed at. They hate it so much even the cleverest ones can lose control and make silly mistakes. This I relate to pretty well. As a youngster, I did not want to be laughed at. It happened too often. But if you're good at being funny, you can train yourself to have power of a sort. And people that I probably shouldn't have been friends with them anyway because they were dicks. But if I had known that they were just trying to get me to lose it, I might have learned how to train myself not to.
My goodness, that's a lesson that I find I'm having to teach kids again and again and again. It's like, just walk away. You're doing exactly the thing that they want you to do.
And it's inevitable too. Like if you teach new classes every year, it's just an endless lesson. Yes. It's like, I'm sorry, you too cannot defeat embarrassment or humiliation. You just have to eat it and move on to the next day.
Yes.
Sucks. Get used to it, kid. So Nathaniel whips out the systemic vice. Want to read this? The boy was almost frothing.
The boy was almost frothing at the mouth. He was so angry. He stamped his foot like a toddler in the playground. Then, as I hoped, he forgot himself and went for the obvious attack. It was the systemic vice again, the bully's favourite. He spat out the incantation, and I felt the bands drawing in.
That's awesome. I really want to see what this looks like. You know what I mean? I just saw something with bands constricting on a person.
Yeah.
Magically. I wish I could remember what that was. Some cartoon or another. So Bartimaeus intones Nathaniel's name, followed by a counter spell. The kid cancels the spell before it can rebound on him. And then Bartimaeus is just flipping him shit. And then he says he'll go back to his bag of tricks. The kid busts out the stimulating compass. From each of the 5 points of the pentacle I was in, a glowing column of electricity shot up, jarring and crackling. It was as if 5 lightning bolts had been momentarily trapped. In another instant, each column had discharged into a horizontal beam that pierced me with the force of a javelin. Arcs of electricity coursed around my body. I screamed and jerked, carried off the floor by the force of the charge. And then Bartimaeus launches it back and nearly kills the kid. You want to do the kid's coat?
The kid's coat. The kid's coat had fallen over his face. Slowly he raised his head and peered out from under it. I gave him a friendly thumbs up. Keep going, I grinned. One day, if you work hard and stop making all these stupid mistakes, you might make a real grown-up wizard.
Oh, my God. Bartimaeus would drive me nuts. Son of a bitch.
It's such a lovely scene because there's some real danger here, but it's basically played for laughs, isn't it? It's a slapstick routine.
Oh, yeah, he absolutely could have died.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Bartimaeus is like, careful, your master will come up to see what you're doing. And Nathaniel isn't worried. He realized that Bartimaeus learned his name, and that's how he could counterspell. I had a question. Didn't he already show that he was anxious about this in the scene with the master about getting his name? I feel like they're kind of over egging
He should have worked it out by this point, that what's going on here.
Like, he's read all these books. He didn't know that a demon could counterspell you if he had your name. Maybe it's not a well-known secret.
I don't know, because it was built up as such an important thing to keep your name secret. It's one point where it almost disappoints a little bit that all it really gives the demon power to do is evade whatever things you're throwing at it. It's not cataclysmic. It's not like a demon knowing your name means that they can control you or they can attack you.
And whereas I was thinking it was purely that the demon could give your name to someone else who would then have power over you magically. I didn't even consider that a demon could do a little magic-y business of their own.
But I guess you're right. I guess that knowledge is dangerous in the hands of another magician, isn't it? And what's to stop Bartimaeus telling someone?
Yeah, and Bartimaeus is smart enough to get somebody to really want to destroy Nathaniel. So giving the right person his name could get him released.
Yeah.
If the person was mad enough. How do you convince somebody to kill your enslaver?
It's not a question I've pondered.
Sorry, I'll let you think about it a while we continue. Nathaniel gets mad when Bartimaeus talks like a teen. He starts to get into a fighting stance. Bartimaeus follows his lead. Ptolemy is very similar in look to Nathaniel, though much better looking. And now I'm wondering if Bartimaeus' love for him had a sexual component as well as filial. Or again, if it's just an aesthetic thing.
I think it's more an aesthetic thing. He's clearly affectionate about this, about Ptolemy, and yeah, it's. He's talked about loving the boy, hasn't he? I don't think there's any insinuation that that's a sexual thing.
I feel about Bartimaeus like I feel about the doctor. Like, it would be wholly bizarre to find out the doctor was in physical love with somebody or even knew, like, who was prettier than who for a human. But every once in a while, he falls in love with a rose or whatever. It happens occasionally.
I also think gives us a useful visual because we've had Nathaniel described as quite an awkward-looking child.
Mm-hmm.
Slightly strange, slightly distant, pale. He's described in a way that is slightly misproportioned. I don't know how you're picturing him in your mind, but I'm seeing a kind of a cross between a young Asa Butterfield. Have you seen Hugo?
Mm-mm.
Oh, well, that's a film that you should definitely watch. You would enjoy it. It's based on a book called The Invention of Hugo Cabret. And he's a very kind of wide-eyed, pale child with kind of slightly matted hair. He doesn't look like he's been well looked after in that film because he hasn't, because it's a film about a boy who's living by himself in the clock of a station. And I'm picturing that, but with a little bit of as if it's been animated for a Tim Burton film or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I pictured him like a little skinny, a little gangly, with a big head. He's more of a silhouette than a person to me.
But and then by contrast, we've got Ptolemy is described as kind of perfectly proportioned, and obviously he's Egyptian, so we're a definite contrast to the paleness of the other child. So we're given a really nice visual, I think, between the two of them. Like I say, this scene just leaps off the page and looks like it's ripe to be filmed straight away.
Totally. Nathaniel ponders how he can break Bartimaeus without being countered, and Bartimaeus hopes that he can exhaust the boy by making him angry. Some magicians have been known to drop dead simply from overexertion. It's a high-stress lifestyle they have, poor things. Bartimaeus finds out that Nathaniel isn't working for anyone else. He's doing it all on his own. Bartimaeus tells him some girl tried to take the amulet. Nathaniel is intrigued, but he plows on. He tells Bartimaeus about the big beardo, about how he was covered in blood, and he thinks Lovelace is up to some bad business. And Nathaniel starts to give Bartimaeus new orders, but Bartimaeus explains how he has no leverage. He tells Nathaniel that he could spill his name to friends and enemies. Nathaniel decides to pull that move where you send multiple copies of the blackmail info to your attorney to be mailed to the media in the event of your death. And it works! Our last quote, the indefinite confinement spell.
The indefinite confinement spell is a bad one, and one of the worst threats magicians can make. You can be trapped for centuries in horrid, minute spaces, and to cap it all, some of them are just plain daft. Matchboxes, bottles, handbags. I even knew a Ginny once who was imprisoned in a dirty old lamp.
Just weaving in some ancient lore. I love it. So Bartimaeus gives in and agrees to continue working.
Oh, it's so clever though, isn't it? Because they're suddenly bound to each other. Their futures are unwillingly entwined. Bartimaeus has got a hold over Nathaniel, but he's found a way of kind of using that against Bartimaeus.
Oh my God. Just when this plot came out, I just thought, what if the kid died? Or like
well, yeah, it's
got stuck in the hospital, or
but
like
that's what's so
trip.
clever about it. That's what's so clever about it, because Bartimaeus now actually is going to be looking out for the kid, and having previously been looking for ways to trick him, and constantly you think one slip and Nathaniel's going to get it. He's basically now engineered for Bartimaeus to be his protector, which is very clever.
Clever, but also evil.
Yeah.
But that's this system. That's how it works. Got to get leverage on your opponent. Oh, man. This book is so good. I can't wait for more. How did you feel about this section?
Loved it. and that's the end of part one, isn't it? We're through the first part of the book, and that feels right. That feels earned. And the book's in 3 parts. It takes a kind of traditional 3-act structure. Interestingly, in his more recent books, Jonathan Stroud has taken a 5-part structure as his norm. The Lockwood books start with a part 1, which is usually slightly set apart from the rest of the story. Part 1 is a hit the ground running Indiana Jones style prologue to the main action.
Like the start of a Bond film.
Very much that kind of pattern. So it's interesting that his structure has developed. Maybe it's simpler. I feel like this part 1 that we've just read through is juggling a lot of balls and very skillfully bringing these threads together to reach a point where it's like that's all tied up at the end of part 1, but a bigger thing has been established. That this is what's going to happen next.
Yeah, it's almost like he wove a braid, and at the end of that braid is Bartimaeus and Nathaniel in a choke lock falling off a cliff together.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of one of those stories where somebody's handcuffed to their enemy and they're on the run.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's always fun, isn't it? There's an episode of The Avengers where it begins with Steed, and it's in the Tara King era. Steed and Tara King spring a trap on someone they've been monitoring, a kind of big league criminal, and Steed handcuffs the guy to him for the rest of the story, because the actual story is about a whole different bunch of people, and the story is one of the ones where everyone in the town has been put to sleep, so they are on their own. And the whole story takes place with the two of them kind of running around dealing with this situation, handcuffed to each other. Brilliant.
That's amazing. Also save money on extras.
Yes, yeah.
Or are they passed out on the street?
That was the Avengers way. Yeah, you see the occasional body, but yeah. It's
nice. Oh, my God. Wow, that was great. Well, we could go on for hours, I'm sure. This book is worth it. I got some wild news yesterday.
Oh, wow.
You know that thing where people say shoot your shot? It was big during the pandemic. People would be like, invite the famous people to your podcast or whatever. So I was like, well, who's one of my favorite writers? Who wrote my favorite science fiction book? And who's still alive? It's Lois McMaster Bujold. I emailed her friend who runs her website, and he connected me to her. And she sounds so game and so on top of it. She was saying she sent me all kinds of information. She listened to the damn podcast, because we've covered the Vor game, a couple times.
Yeah.
And it was almost like she was about to give me pointers or whatever, and then she was like, well, I could save that for the podcast. Kind of. I told Sophia, I told a friend of mine, I was like, you got to have brass balls if you're going to go listen to somebody cover your material.
Hell yeah, haven't you?
It could go way wrong. I know, for example, Joe Ford has had writers from the Doctor Who world on Strictly Come Hamster.
He has. So Hamster. Gary Russell has contributed.
Yeah. And he's been critical of some of Gary Russell's work.
He has, yeah. Joe doesn't pretend. I do think that's why people respect Joe, and I know that there are Doctor Who podcasts that won't criticize it at all.
Yeah.
And I think the way that Joe is able to get away with it, I say get away with it like it's a bad thing. I mean, he's brutally honest, but his affection for the material shines through nevertheless. So he's able to be very, very objective without being rude, because it always comes from a place of genuine admiration.
Yeah. Well, most of the writers I've interviewed are like friends or people that I've read a bit of their work, but like, like I like something they've done, but I'm not an obsessive fan. I mean, I'm not technically an obsessive fan, I guess, because I haven't read all her other work besides the Vorkosigan saga. But boy, howdy, I've read through it 3 or 4 times, and it's awesome. So I'm going to have to, like, suppress the fanboy while I interview her.
Fantastic. Oh, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, so that'll be sometime in January or February. Hopefully we work it out. Sophia lives in Stockholm, so scheduling is a bit tricky. She's only an hour ahead of you, but for me, it's that for some reason that extra hour is like a little
really significant extra hour.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's my news. Let's see, anything else? Recommendations.
Well, I would heartily recommend a film that has just been released in the UK. I imagine it's similarly available in the US of A, called Conclave. Have you heard about this?
I haven't.
So, Conclave is a how to describe is a mystery thriller, I guess. It's based on a novel by Robert Harris, who you may know has quite a decent track record, both as an author and an author of novels that have been turned into films. And this one's a cracker. It's really great. And it's basically about the election of a new pope. And in it, it begins with the death of the current pope. And in it, we see the process of electing a pope, which in itself is very strange and weirdly cinematic, because there's all this ritual that has to be gone through. But then the mystery thriller bit is that the various potential popes that have to be decided on by all these people who've been, these cardinals who have been locked together to elect the pope. The major candidates, it turns out, all have either character flaws or secrets that are going to gradually rear their heads and get in the way of what is never going to be a very smooth process. And it starts out that there's a bit of a... So the main character is Ralph Fiennes, who is the dean in this process. So he is the cardinal whose job it is to oversee the election. And he's brilliant. I mean, the camera just lingers on his face and he does very little with it. And throughout the film, they've kind of amplified his breathing. So you get a lot of lingering shots of Ralph Fiennes looking very serious and breathing heavily, which doesn't sound great, but it's somehow so compelling. Stanley Tucci is the cardinal that he starts off supporting, and he's the kind of the liberal pope, the pope who wants the church to look after gay people and to have a bigger role for women. And he's up against cardinals who are ultra conservative. John Lithgow is the other favourite, who is portrayed as the candidate who we wouldn't want to become the Pope because he's entrenched and he's conservative. But there's also, has he played dirty to get where he is? And gradually more and more kind of things are revealed. Isabella Rossellini is there as one of the nuns who is, she's sort of the sister in charge of making sure they're fed. And she doesn't say very much because there's not a massive role for women in this process, but she's there in the background of so many scenes, just her eyes watching and her face telling you exactly what she's thinking. And there is a scene later on where she gets to speak, and it is a kind of mic drop moment. And it's beautifully written. There's a moment it's also very profound about faith, and it understands the nature of faith and the nature of organized religion in a way that I think very little writing does. There's a sermon that Ray Fiennes preaches in the first act of the film, and it's a kind of punch the air moment, and you sit there thinking, if sermons were always this good, I'd be in church all the time. He's brilliant, but it's a very starry cast as well, and they're all great, and the tension in this film absolutely bristles. And it's very, for a film it's very visual as well. It's set in these kind of white marble halls, and there are moments, there's a beautiful overhead shot where they all walk along this white paving with black umbrellas, and these blacks and whites, and of course red, because they're all dressed in red. So it's a very stark visual experience. And you genuinely don't know where it's going from one scene to the next. Conclave.
That sounds tremendous. That gives me an additional recommendation. You mentioned Isabella Rossellini, and I would direct people to Blue Velvet.
Oh, yeah.
Hubba Hubba, but also very dark performance. Good movie. What does Dennis Hopper say? Don't look at me! He says some real fucked up stuff in that one. And the other one, I already mentioned Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency from 2016. It wasn't for James, but I think if you're an American and you've never read Dirk Gently, dip your toe in it. There might be something in it for you. It was fun and exciting and like beautifully shot, but it is definitely nothing like the source material. So, man, I was like messaging my friend. I was like, this is not what I was expecting, and yet I couldn't put it down. It was like if you've had a sandwich that always tastes the same, and you rely on it, it's consistent, and then there was something weird about it, and you finished it. You know, it's like there was a hair in my sandwich, but the hair was delicious. Very weird. And then Citadel Diana on Prime is just amazing. There was a show called Citadel, which was like American and flashy and pretty. It's by the Russo brothers. And it was fine. I watched like an episode or two. But Citadel Diana is made in Italy with Italian actors by I don't know if the Russo brothers hired other people to make it or what, but it's way better. The cinematography is incredible. The lead actress is just like the kind of presence where you like can't take your eyes off her. She's always doing something. It's tremendous, like crime drama. I don't know if you can call it speculative fiction, but I would, because, you know, it's in the near future. They got weird guns. Close enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a really good one. And that one, no reservations. It's definitely top of the list. So, last is plugs. Do you have anything you need to plug this week?
Yeah, I do. I should plug, I've recently recorded an episode of A Hamster with a Blunt Penknife, Joe Ford's Doctor Who podcast, in which I do my top and bottom 10 Doctor Who books. And I had a really fun time doing it. That's just come out in this last week. And I think go give it a listen, because it's a lot of fun. The other thing to say is that I'm recording another podcast with Joe, which is going to go out on Christmas Eve, and it's going to be an exploration of the novelization of Time and the Rani by love them or hate them authors Pip and Jane Baker, who, if nothing else, can be guaranteed to use a lot of words.
I haven't read any of their novelizations yet, but I love their TV work.
Well, get yourself a good thesaurus.
Oh, Lacertian glitter ball? Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean it's. Well, I'm looking forward to discussing it. I can't say that it's a very well written book, but
Is
it's
all
very
that
entertaining.
I need to know is the scene where the doctor finds out where the tetraps live as scary in the book as it is in the show?
You mean not at all scary?
That channel of blood, and they're like hanging off the ceiling. Scary.
It's as ridiculous. I mean, it's quite. They like describing this stuff. I mean, yes, they really they dig in and find, the words obscene and fetid and fug keep coming up.
Fug. Oh, that's
Fug.
fun. Oh boy, yeah, that's awesome. And
I'm going to show you the cover of this book because you're going to love it.
Oh yes. Oh, it's people hanging upside down.
Well, no, it's tetraps.
Oh. For
that's
some reason, I thought the middle one had a person.
No. It's definitely got a tetrappy face. I think it was a model shot, but
scary.
A rare photographic cover for one of the original Target range.
Oh, also the thing that releases all the toxic bees or whatever. Was that scary?
Ball.
The glitter ball?
It's not. Is it scary?
All the people were scared that were running,
That's true.
in horror.
That's true. It's certainly described with a lot of exclamation marks.
I can't wait to listen to this. This is great. I was so excited to see your name pop up with the top 10 books. I don't have like a ton of experience with the books.
Neither do. Well, so what my experience is I was going to say limited, but my experience is it revolves around certain ranges, and one of the ranges that Joe often talks about is the BBC book range, which I didn't really get into. So I do the top 10 with the caveat that my experience hovers around certain areas and is certainly not comprehensive.
Did you get into the Eighth Doctor comic strips?
I certainly did.
Oh man, I got the Glorious Dead. That's the one I've read so far.
They are all great.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's probably easier to find that stuff over there. Although I guess I could order it online. I was never a comic books guy before Doctor Who, it seems.
No, I'm not really a comic books guy, and it's one of those funny things where if it wasn't Doctor Who, I probably wouldn't be reading it, but they're so good. The Eighth Doctor ones are really fine.
Cool. Well, I can't wait to listen to that. Oh, and how do people find you on, is it James Lark on Threads?
James Lark. Yeah, so on Threads, which I don't use very much, I'm using Blue Sky much more these days, still on the artist formerly known as Twitter. You'll find me on Instagram under the title Works of Lark, and my podcast, Neurotic Literature, is still available if you like listening to the occasional short story.
Hell yeah. And you can find us on Facebook, The Great and Secret Knowledge. Tell all your friends. If we're not on a podcast app, let us know and we'll try to figure it out. I'm still trying to get set up on YouTube and maybe Google Play. We'll figure it out. We're on Spotify, so we made it. We made it. What the hell? You can send us an email. Damn it. You can send us an email at greatandsekretknowledge@gmail.com. And you can find me on all manner of social media sites at El Jefe Tacoma. Please check in. If you do like the Vorkosigan saga and you have any questions you'd like answered by the lady herself, send those in and I'll make you a part of the show. And I'll give you a shout out if you want one. And if so, tell me how to pronounce your name. Listen to Shattered Worlds RPG. That's my actual play podcast set in the world of my novels. And listen or watch our Twitch stream, Omniversal Escapades. We play all manner of role-playing games over there. Right now we're doing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but as a sort of cowboy post-apocalyptic thing. That's every other Sunday at 6:30 Pacific Standard Time, twitch.tv/Omniversal Escapades, or on YouTube. You can see every episode we put out at Omniversal Escapades. And yeah, that'll be tomorrow. If you're hanging about, wait, tomorrow doesn't mean anything to these people because it's like a month from now. You can figure it out. Go to the website. It'll tell you when we're on next. And yeah, I think that is everything. Framing your master, are you? Nasty.
Excellent.
A huge thanks to James Lark of jameslark.co.uk for providing our wonderful theme song. Thank you, James. Well, anyway, I was just mentioning it because America is just chock full of them, even to this day. Too many.
Yeah.
Too many guns. I'm sure it'll get better, though, with Trump in the White House.
That's yes. Yes, that's right. Everything's going to get better, I'm sure.
Practicing saying it for when I'm, told to.
Oh, for when you're stood before a kangaroo court to
something like that. Yeah, maybe they'll make it fun and it'll be like the one in Star Trek: The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint, where Q is in like a funny outfit and a floating throne. I could do that.
I think if you can say one thing for the Trump administration, it's that kind of funny costumes are probably in. Funny costumes and funny hats and funny hairstyles.
Oh, boy. We've been talking a while. Maybe we should introduce this show.
We probably should, yeah.
Did anything funny happen in the last 2 weeks?
Probably,
yeah. I watched Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
Which version?
It was an American version from 2016.
Right. Now, I watched an episode of that, and it seemed to me the least Douglas Adams-based series that had ever been made.
It was unusual.
It's got Samuel Barnett in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it felt like, the gunfighters from Doctor Who?
I do. I know it and love it.
How it was like Britain or British people kind of satirizing or parodizing what they think America is like quintessentially. And some of it they got really right. For example, that guy just blowing Charlie away. Rizzo Razzo or whatever his name is. And it's kind of like that, where it's so brutal and violent. Like season 1 is just like super violent.
It was very violent. I remember that.
I'm like, where is the guy that gets rained on all the time? Like, I like a little more whimsy in my
right. Where's the whimsy?
Douglas Adams adaptations.
But also, so Dirk Gently in the books is a sort of middle-aged, overweight slob of a man. So that series had cast kind of youthful Samuel Barnett, who looks about 10 years younger than he is, and is very svelte. And it just felt like an odd thing he wasn't really playing a character that resembled, like, not just physically, in terms of the character as well, completely different character. So there's a point where you go, well, why have you called this Dirk Gently then? If stylistically it's a completely different concept and the character's different, it's like the Peter Rabbit film. Are you familiar with these?
I have not seen the Peter Rabbit film.
I've not seen, but I've seen the trailer, and that was enough. When you consider the source material is these very, these beloved books with the most beautiful
I'm all about
artwork.
those, the Peter Cottontail and all that.
And the trailer was for what seemed to be a very generic family film with CGI rabbits played like Home Alone with rabbits, and all kind of slapstick comedy and noise and shouting and movement and people falling downstairs. Like, okay, so why have you called it Peter Rabbit then?
Yeah, kids today need noise, apparently. I didn't need a lot of noise when I was a kid.
No.
For me, noise was like a dog barking in Watership Down or something,
which was all you needed to scare you for weeks. But the reason they called it Peter Rabbit, obviously, is to sell the film, and so coming back to Dirk Gently, you assume that they started off probably with a script that was closer to the book, and it got gradually further away.
Yeah.
But also, it came on the back of, we got a series called Dirk Gently. I can't remember whether it was Dirk Gently's
I think it's
Detective
just
Agency.
Dirk Gently is the title of the British one.
We got a series a few years before that Samuel Barnett one with Stephen Mangan as Dirk Gently. Again, not a man who resembles the character in the book, but in terms of tone, it was much closer. And it was really rather good, and it was a BBC production, so there were only 3 episodes. It was clearly a low budget project, but they were really nicely done, and never got recommissioned.
Oh man, you always want more of the thing that's great, but if you got 22 of it, it might not be as great.
Maybe, and it's have you seen the Stephen Moffat Sherlock series?
No, I saw the first season.
Right, the first season is where you should stop, because the first season is by a long way the best, and the second season is fine, but doesn't deliver on that tantalizing cliffhanger that season 1 leaves you with, and then the third season is a car crash, and it's this thing of progressively forgetting what it was that made the first season is such a clever love letter to the original books, because it takes those stories and does a modern twist on them, and as it goes on, they even forget that Sherlock Holmes is a detective. By the end, they're doing little dramas about Sherlock Holmes himself, which Sherlock Holmes should never be about, and there aren't even any mystery notes.
I'm sure it's just because it's the two of us, but like I can't help but shift into Doctor Who, which is like that's kind of what happened to Matt Smith. Is it became about
exactly
the legend of the 11th Doctor? It
became all about the Doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, Dirk Gently. Well, I had fun. The second season was almost too much whimsy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like they over-pivoted. They only got 2 seasons, so I think they might have swung the needle over a little too far. But that's the thing about Douglas Adams. He knew when to say when, like what was just enough. Although the one with the bistro guy that flies around and kicks people in the knees or like calls them names. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's Life, the Universe, and Everything.
That's the one. I felt like that was a little, like he was trying a little too hard in that one. But overall,
that's my favorite.
No way.
That's my favorite of the books. Yeah.
My apologies.
And that book is based on a script he wrote for Doctor Who.
Wow.
I mean, it's crammed full of ideas, but they're all really good ideas. And of all the problem with Hitchhikers in prose form is that it's based on a radio series which was very episodic, so it didn't have to follow a kind of traditional novelistic structure. And in fact, the first book just ends because he was so slow to write it that in the end they just sent the publisher around to his house and they phoned him and said, "You've got half an hour, finish it." So the last chapter just stopped. Whereas the third book is actually based on, like, as I say, a Doctor Who script, so it has a beginning, middle, and end. It's got a proper story structure.
Yeah. Were we the ones that were talking about the TV movie Britain? I feel like
It
I
might have
talked
come
about
up.
it a
It
lot.
might well have come up, yeah. And your feeling about it is?
Oh, I love the hell out of it. But it just ends. It's like heartbreaking when it ends. Again, it's how I felt at the end of X-Men, and I got out and I'm like, that just wasn't long enough.
Right.
Ugh, I always want more.
But is that the TV version, the original TV version, the one that used some of the original radio cast?
Probably, yeah. It was from the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Simon Jones.
So that was Simon Jones, yeah. That was, oh yeah, we were talking about it because it's got the animatronic head.
Yeah. Oh my God. The other thing I thought about Doctor Who was how fucking prevalent guns are. That, like, they brought Doctor Who to America, like in the TV movie, Doctor Who got gunned down in the street like a dog. And then fucking next time they come to the Old West, but it's really another planet or some bullshit. But there's guns all over the place.
Doctor Who has since the Innes Lloyd era, so the very last few Hartnell stories, and certainly Troughton, Doctor Who has always had lots of guns in it. Because, I mean, especially since the invention of units, where you've got basically the Doctor Who's got heavies. And it's really interesting because Doctor Who fans will often be very much, well, like, the Doctor's clever, he's resourceful, he doesn't use guns. But it's like, yeah, but he's got a lot of friends who do. And I think secretly Doctor Who fans really just love watching a battalion of earthly soldiers doing battle with an alien.
What's the one where he barely tries to beg the Brigadier not to send his men in, and his men just are like running down these aisles between pallets and like jumping over? Is it Invasion or Web of Fear?
Web of Fear. That's the Web of Fear, isn't it?
They're like jumping over the top of columns and like coming around, just blasting away. So many deaths on the Doctor's hands.
I used to love that. I used to love that when I was growing up, and also I love it now because so many of the deaths are the same stunt guy, and you can actually start to spot how many times the same person gets killed off.
That's awesome.
But so I don't know if you've made it through the season 25 Blu-ray set yet.
Oh no, I haven't got any of the Blu-rays.
Okay, so there's a feature on the Blu-rays where they sit down former cast members to watch an episode and comment on it. It's a kind of Gogglebox style format where they're sitting there commenting on it, and it'll be the people who were originally in it, but it'll also be other doctors or other companions, other people associated with the show. And I find it quite awkward to watch because they're clearly not being shown the whole story. So they're having to form an opinion of edited highlights whilst talking through it, often of a story that they won't have seen. So it's sort of superficially entertaining, but I'm not sure it sheds much light on these episodes. Janet Fielding, Tegan, is one of the kind of regular star contributors because she's very acerbic and very funny. And usually, I mean, she's quite self-deprecating and she doesn't mince her words about the episode she was in, but she's clearly she's quite forthright about episodes she wasn't in, which again, we're talking episodes that she hasn't necessarily seen, because it's not like she's a Doctor Who fan.